Just a few basics for today. We are recording the session, so just wanted to warn everybody, we thank you for coming, but please remain on mute unless you're speaking. We are doing a live transcript. If by chance you've joined us by phone, please don't put us on hold. And if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to put them in the chat window. With welcome questions throughout. So my name is Lisa Fellows, and I'm one of the co-leads of the Project Management Community Group. I'm joined today by my co-lead, Jen Birch, and members of our steering committee. Today's agenda is to share a Connect tip. In January, we did a great intro session to using the Connect platform. So we're just gonna try monthly to share a Connect tip with the group. We're also going to show you our upcoming webinars as scheduled for 2022. Then we're going to go to our keynote speaking, who's going to talk to us about DEI and project management. Okay. And then we'll talk to you about an exciting opportunity that we have to join our steering committee. So first off, our Connect tip for the day is to talk about using hashtags. Hashtags are a great way to organize and categorize the content in the community site. They can be applied to discussions, posts, blog items, glossary terms, almost anywhere in the community. Tagged items are then prioritized in search results, as well as they're nicely linkable. For instance, if you're posting a job opportunity for folks, if you put in the hashtag job opportunity, it will take you to and make your job opportunity findable. So it gives you the community a great way to organize, and you'll see it'll actually come up with everybody who's posted job opportunity as their hashtag. And it actually goes across the different communities as well. So not only ours, if other communities in Connect pick up on it and you're a member, you'll find those as well. So just to kind of show you, you can actually go to, I go to the discussion threads in the communities. If you're posting a discussion topic, for instance, in project management, you can go to the discussions. And you'll see we put a few of the most popular ones in our intro text here, but if you go to discussions and if you post a new message, as you're posting your message in the body, as you end it, just type your, as I call it, a number sign or a pound sign. Children call it a hashtag. So a hashtag and job opportunity. And you'll see it'll populate. Or if you want to do something, maybe you're talking about governance, you can do governance. And if one doesn't pop up that makes sense, feel free to create your own. But we really, in particular, are looking at job opportunities because we've had, which is a really good thing, we've had lots and lots of job opportunities being posted. And we just thought it would be a nice way for everybody to be able to see them all with one click. So that's a quick tips on using hashtags in your discussion posts. Some upcoming project management community group meetings. If you don't have these on your calendar, we encourage you to. Most of them are events already in community, I think clear through the July date. We'll be adding the others shortly. So feel free to register for the events and get them on your calendars. And we're always looking for speakers to speak at any of our monthly meetings. So if you have an interest or a topic that you're passionate about that you would like to share with the group, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So next, I'd like to hand it over to our keynote speakers, Dr. Felix Zuniga and Marcia Dority Baker will be speaking to us on DEI and project management. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to them.
All right, well, hello, welcome. Thank you for inviting us to join your CG meeting this month. We are super excited to be here, and Felix is going to be driving slides, but this is a partnership. We enjoy talking about this conversation, and we're really happy to be here. If you'd like to put your questions in the chat, that would be awesome. I have learned, as I have been working in the DEI space the last couple of years, that sometimes you feel like you're the only one with that question. And so it can be very helpful to have, to see that question show up in the chat. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in there. If it's not something you're comfortable chatting, go ahead and you can private chat to Felix or I, and we'll make sure that the question gets covered. But welcome, hello, it's nice to see you all.
Yeah. Likewise, Marcia, this is not a presentation per se, right, on everything you need to know about DEI, and that would make us all knowing about DEI. But like you said, I think it's a conversation that we're having, right? If anything, we're modeling what we're asking people to do, is have a conversation about some of these topics. So it's nice to see you all, nice to see some friends. If you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, where you're from, right? Where are you at today? I know that we always span the whole United States when we're having these kinds of meetings, and I know whenever we're planning anything in our DEI advisory committee that, we have to manage like 4 different time zones, right, all the time. So nice to see you all. Thank you for having us here. This is just a brief agenda, kind of what we're going to cover, right? Some baseline definitions, some DEI concepts that we talk about in the advisory committee, just some thoughts that we have, and especially resources, right? Resources are always a good thing to share. Let's start off with maybe doing our little introduction. Marcia, why don't you go ahead and start and talk about our DEI journey? How about that?
Sure. No, that sounds great. Thank you. Well, my name is Marcia Dority Baker. I am in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I previously was at the University of Nebraska on the Lincoln campus as the Assistant Director for Academic Technologies. And I'm actually transitioning. On March 1st, I'll be starting as a leadership coach and program facilitator for more associates. So those of you that have gone through the IT Leaders Program before, that's the new area that I'm getting ready to jump into. So I'm excited about that. But my role in DEI has been the privilege to serve as the DEI Advisory Committee Chair. This is a wonderful opportunity with Educause, and all of you here are part of Educause and being part of this CG and know the power of that network, of getting to learn from our peers, of getting to give back to our community. And so that has been enjoyable, being able to partner with other groups working in this space like the ARIA group. If you've done anything with ARIA, you know how wonderful that and powerful that journey is as well. And part of this has been able to work with Felix on the DEI committee and some other things together, being able to say, hey, how could we have conversations around this? How can we reach out to the CGs and talk about what is DEI, what is diversity, equity, inclusion, and what does that mean to us as people? But how do we help in this space as people within an organization or within our campuses and even our communities? So glad to be here today and looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Thank you, Marcia. Like you said, it's been a privilege, right, to be able to kind of do this work and work with everybody in the community who wants to improve things. I'm Felix Zuniga, Dr. Felix Zuniga from the California State University. I'm at the Office of the Chancellor. The role I play, as well as I see my coworker Chris and Carol here, coworkers, we're campus engagement partners, right? Our role is, I always describe it as herding cats, right? Working with our IT leadership across our system, the CSUs, over 500,000 students, or nearly 500,000 students, 50,000 faculty, staff, and we have a lot of technical people doing a lot of technical things. So whenever we can get the cats like going in the same direction, that's helpful, and that's our primary goal. So we work to build collaboration, communicate, and engagement across our system. So it's nice to see you all. And my role in DEI is just someone who cares, right? It's been a passion of mine always. When I was at the university, I know I wouldn't be where I was at if I didn't have mentors and leaders who cared about the topic and cared about me and helped me advance. And I'm just doing my next part in helping that next generation come along. So we're glad to be here. And we're just gonna, like I said, just have a conversation, so please feel free to jump into the chat if you want to throw a question out there for us, or if you want to come off mic and turn on your camera, we're totally welcome with that. Like I said, we're amongst friends here, so we want to just, have that conversation. So we're going to just start off with just some couple of definitions, right? Some things that sometimes when we talk about these things, we don't even know what we're talking about. I think yesterday, Chris and I, we were trying to come up with a good definition of inclusivity, right? And it can go all over the place, right? So just breaking down DEI, and Marcia, please feel free to jump in whenever you want, or you hear me say something wrong, you can't virtually slap me, but let me know, So I was looking for a good definition because it's hard, right? I mean, diversity, we hear these words all the time, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I found this that I liked, right? So it's talking about the variations or characteristics within a group of people. What makes us unique? It could be cognitive, it could be personality traits. It's more sometimes than what you see. And I think a lot of times we narrow it down to what we can see, whether that's gender or, ethnicity and race. But definitely those things are included there. So you see race, age, definitely something we talk about, religion, orientation, cultural background, family status are something that comes up with diversity. Anything to add there, Marcia, before I move on?
No, thank you for finding that great definition. I'm actually just putting a link in the chat here to the Educause Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion resources page. So that way you can see kind of this larger ecosystem that's out there.
Great. And since you're on that topic, Marcia, do you want to talk a little bit about our approach within the DEI roadmap and maybe some of the stuff that we have going on with Educause DEI?
Yeah, sure. That sounds great. So as you can see here, this slide, the DEI roadmap, and sometimes it's like, well, what does that mean? How does all of this fit together? And I appreciate the definition that you provided on the previous slide, because sometimes it's hard to understand how it all fits together. So for me as a visual person, I see this as a bit of a Venn diagram, right? All of us have different circles that make us up who we are. And as you overlap all of those, that creates the unique you, the unique I, each of us here today. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do with the DEI roadmap, and some of you commented on it when it was released as a draft form back in October and November, and I'll put a link to that so you can see where it is today, was the idea of having a DEI roadmap, which means you can jump on this at any place in time. And a week or so ago, Felix and I were chatting at a working meeting, and we talked about, he made this great comment about how it's like taking a road trip. If he's driving from California to the East Coast, he has a map and he knows where he wants to go. But getting across the country can be a little bit more challenging depending upon what season it is. So it's winter. So if you're going to go through the Rockies, you're going to see snow. You might want to take the southern route, right? But in the summer, you might want to go through the northern route and see the big skies of Montana. So that's really our approach with this DEI roadmap, is that there's different ways to join that map, to get on the journey. And it's also different for each of us where we might join. Some of us might be in the explore stage. So this could be where you're learning a new topic and you just want to know more about it. That's why we've said, go ahead and put your question in the chat. We want to talk about this conversation together as a group. Other people might be ready to engage. You might feel like, okay, I have learned all I can and I'm ready to make it meaningful. How do I get involved? How do I do that as a person? How can I do that as part of my team? And then there'll be others who say, all right, I am ready to do this transform. I am ready to step up, put my flag in the ground and say, here's what I'm going to do to transform. I don't really know what that means. What do I need to be doing? Who's doing it? Who could I learn from? And so our thought was, because we're all as humans evolving at a different rate through our life journey, this would be a really good opportunity to use this approach for our DI roadmap. I can tell you, and I'm going to put the link here in the chat in just a moment for the draft. I can tell you that this is getting ready to become I'll say a published opportunity for us to all look at. And thanks to the feedback of many of you on this call, we're ready to get that pushed out, hopefully later this spring. Put that link in here.
Yeah, one thing to add to that, Marcia, would be that we could be at different levels of each of the different kinds of topics that we're talking about, right? We may be ready to transform certain aspects, but we're still exploring other places, and it's okay, right? It's important to know that we don't know everything, or we don't have to be the experts at everything that we need to know to move forward in this conversation. I know coming from the PM perspective, there's so many tools out there and frameworks, and you don't have to master everything before you can move forward. You have to kind of start where you're at and do what you can. Equity. So this is one of the fun conversations that I remember in our doctoral classes we always had on, equity versus equality, right? And this little picture is something that you've seen on the internet. If you haven't, take a look for it. And there's all these different kinds of variations now, right? Because we have other frameworks that we always talk about, like DEI, DEIJ, DEIB, justice, equity, belonging, right? All these kind of DI, EDI, and it gets confusing out there, right? Sometimes with the acronyms that people throw out. But bottom line is we're always still talking about the same type of things, right? So equity versus equality, right? So there's a difference, and sometimes we use those words interchangeably. But getting at what each group or individual needs for the opportunities. And so that it can be very challenging sometimes, because others may feel like something's being taken away from them in order to help others, right? And sometimes it's just taking a step back and looking at what challenges are out there, right? What is that fence that's there that they can't see, and maybe even taking a look at how can we break down that fence, right? That can get into equity, as opposed to having to take from others and give to others. So it's just a part of the conversation that we have and challenges that are out there that exist. But here's kind of just some words around equity and equality. Marcia, anything to add?
Maybe because I'm Central Time and it's noonish, my tummy's telling me it's lunch. I thought of the pie, and I think we've also seen this meme that's been going around on different social networks and platforms about, it's not that you have to give up the pie. There's plenty of slices of pie. It's that everybody gets the opportunity to have a piece of pie. And for me, this visual of how can you help your fellow person? That's what this is about. It's not any less for any of us. It's making sure that everybody else has the opportunity.
Inclusion. I found this quote from Zabin Hirji. Diversity is a fact, inclusion is an act. And rather than copy like a textbook, version of what inclusivity means, I think we all know, right? And there's also this talk about moving beyond inclusivity to belonging. And you also hear being invited to sit at the table, right? And equity, that's equity, right? Being there. But then inclusion is, okay, well, what are we eating? What are we doing while we're at the table? What are we talking about? So being intentional, and that's why we have ACT there, being intentional on what we want to do and how we're being inclusive of our teams. I threw this slide together with some DEI concepts that we talk about. There's so much, right? I mean, you could talk about discrimination, you could talk about hiring practices, you could talk about inclusive language, you can talk about implicit bias, and it becomes very daunting when you look at all the things that are out there with DEI and where do we start. And there's no one way, like we're talking about on the roadmap, to do or learn anything about DEI. And I think with DEI, it's also important to note, and I'll thank my friend Chris on the call for this, it's not a checkbox where if we do one of the three, like we're done with DEI. We have to take those apart and look at each of those. How are we doing on diversity? How are we doing on equity? How are we doing on inclusion? And really take a step back and look at each of those concepts. So for the purposes of today's call, I just want to do a little brief sharing. I see Samia on the call. We worked together on Educause QuickPoll last year, and we asked the community out there, what kind of discrimination are you still facing in the workplace? So this came from the Educause community. It's not necessarily IT in general, but our own group. And these were the top 4 things that were discussed by the respondents, right? So gender discrimination, age discrimination, discrimination based on race or ethnicity, and then parental status. And so this is from within our Educause group. And so there's a link to this whole poll and resource on the last page here, so that you'll make sure that you have all of that. But this is still happening, right, within our groups and within our organizations at the university. And so these are the kinds of things that we'd like to, take a look at and start having conversations on amongst our teams, within ourselves, and our organizations together. Because like Marcia said, it's a journey, and each of us is in a different place. Our teams are in different places, and our organizations are in different places. Anything to add to that, Marcia?
No, and I did just drop the link to that
Right.
QuickPoll in the chat, but as noted, it will be at the end. I think these are items that we see each of us every day. So I appreciate the confirmation.
So as a team, we're talking about DEI roadmap and a hiring toolkit. Marcia, why don't you take on this? Like, these are the 6 topics that rose to the top on that production that we're kind of doing there.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that we started doing pre-COVID, and I know that time is kind of wonky, but when the DEI advisory committee, I think it was in 2019, was really getting started. It came out of the CIO commitment. I'll put that link in the chat in just a moment. And that has 6 steps to the CIO commitment. And so the advisory committee was getting started. And one of the first pain points that we were hearing as a group, but also within our organization, was how to do a better job at hiring, how to have more inclusive hiring practices, how to not only recruit, but to retain really good people. So this whole package around hiring. And so what we started was our DEI hiring toolkit, and then COVID happened. And I know we're not done with COVID yet, but as we're coming out of it, we're all realizing that with the Great Resignation or the Great Reset, and then just the change in the priorities in our lives, that things like being able to work remote, having a little bit more flex time, knowing that some of our staff, especially as working parents, might be teaching their kids from home or monitoring the online teaching from home. They might not have daycare because their schools are closed. That really changed how we look at hiring and retention. And so there will be an updated DEI hiring toolkit that is coming out. And I know some of you commented on it when we asked the community to give us feedback. And it's really about recruiting. So what is the job description? Who is qualified? What does that look like? And I think we've all heard the statistics or the stats around the fact that men, or those that identify as male, will typically apply for any position that they know that they're doing 50-60% of that job. They're like, yeah, I can do that. Women, or those that identify as female, look at it a bit different, and they typically do not apply for a job description unless they're meeting at least 90% of the qualifications that are in that job description. So what we're seeing is we're not, it goes back to, well, we can't get qualified candidates. We don't have anybody in the pipeline. Perhaps it is that job description. So reviewing the job description, making sure that it is very clear about what is required, what is preferred, what those qualifications are. That has really been a big change. And then, as you can see, as we move through these 6 different items, not necessarily 6 steps, though many times if you're hiring a brand new person into a position, it might look like this, but that screening and interviewing. So thinking about how we all have some type of bias in us, that's just who we are as humans, and making sure that the search committee is aware of that. It could be working with HR to make sure that they have covered names and any identifying information for those candidates. So you're looking at an application or an applicant with their qualifications, not identifiers that might cause bias. The hiring and the onboarding, making sure that everybody has a very similar process, making sure that people feel included in that team. We know that having inclusive teams increases that retention, so that people feel valued and heard, that they feel respected, and that they're part of this new organization and team. That retention, that workplace culture. And even more important now is the idea of remote and flex and in person, and how do we manage that? And any of you that have people working remote or in the office know that that can cause some tension. And then this kind of sustainability, right? And that's what 5 and 6 are, the navigating this. How inclusive is our workplace? How inclusive are our teams? Are we doing the best we can? And sometimes a better question could be, who is missing? Who do we not have that should be included? For me, it's always been, how do I help my teams and my organization look like our student body? Our student workers are very diverse within IT, but many times our organizations don't reflect that. How do we close that gap? And then the last one here is something that I think we're all looking at. I'm going to put a link in the chat to the most recent QuickPoll that came out. about DEI and analytics. And this goes around the question of how do we track success? And this is big. This is more than just HR tracking and having a diversity dashboard, right? Of how many males, how many females, that kind of thing. Really, we're talking about how do we talk about and address DEI in the workplace and talk about how successful we are or not and how we can help this be better. So these are kind of big ideas. Once again, I'm a Venn diagram person. They all overlap. And it's not that we're ever going to get it right the first time, but we can have that sure and steady progress towards making it better and being more inclusive and having people feel like they're part of the team and that they want to stay.
Just to add to that, and I'll drop a link into, there was a report released, it's called the ACT report, ACT report, and it's on diversity in IT as a higher level. And they talked about, the importance of DEI not just being something else that we do, but how it really needs to be a central part of our practices, our business practices, and what we do within our organizations. Each one of these things is kind of standard things in hiring, but you can spend, days on just one of these topics, within recruiting, like Marcia talked about, that how that job description is put together and who is eliminated by just what the words we put in there. We've all worked on recruitments and job postings, and we want to hire the most perfect person that can do everything. And we all know that if we hired that person, they're going to be paid twice as much than what the person that you're going to end up getting is, because they can't do everything that's out there. So really taking a look and looking at the practice, because it's real easy when we have a opening to use the last job description that was already kind of done and pre-approved. We don't want to go through that process through HR again. And just get it out there as fast as we can, because we need to hurry up and hire somebody. So taking a look at the very beginning, right? Where are these things posted? Where are these jobs posted? Who's seeing the requirements? Is it somebody just internal from our team that's getting tapped on the shoulder and saying, hey, you should apply and come back up, and we're going to do this? Or are we actually actively going out and looking? And that kind of examination can be done on every single one of these topics. Retention is an important one, right? So we can recruit a whole bunch of different people that look diverse and are diverse, but then are we retaining them? What is the work culture like? What is the organization like? Who's leaving the organization? Are they leaving for similar positions that are kind of like a sideways move, or are they moving up and out? Paying attention to who's leaving the organization. Are we doing exit interviews? Are we asking about these kinds of things? Because a lot of times people are silent about this kind of stuff. There's this expectation that, well, if someone has a problem with it, they're going to speak up and say something. And, you have to realize that sometimes that could be a very costly conversation for people, right? Do I want to make my boss feel uncomfortable because I'm bringing up a topic that they're not comfortable with, and therefore could be used against me later on, right? Because I could be seen as a person who's causing trouble, or, making other problems here instead of just kind of doing my job, right? So it's important to take a look at each of these things and figure out where your organization is at and where you could use some more work, right? There's plenty of free training on implicit bias and things that we can do for ourselves, because I think the only thing we truly have control over is changing ourselves first, and then working on our teams and our organization next. Just some general thoughts, right? There's a whole lot to talk about here. We talked about learning. It takes work. You have to do the work. Get involved. There's a whole lot of ways to get involved, especially within Educause. There's so many different communities that are out there. We have the young professionals community. I see, I think Danielle was here from the young professionals. I know Samia has been in charge of the community groups for DEI in the past. People from ARIA are as well. There's a lot of things, so many different ways to get involved. There's the mentorship circles and mentorship program that's going on through Educause, and these topics can be talked about in any one of these groups. Educate others, right? So once you, start exploring these, have conversations, about, well, what are we doing to change this? And, I think the expectation is that you're not going to be the expert and you're not going to fix everything, but you need to be able to do the work and help others have that conversation. Sometimes it takes us as peers doing that with our peers, as opposed to waiting for kind of a top-down approach, with that. And then, don't stop. It's not a checkbox. It's not a one and done. It's not a training that I go through and then say, okay, I've done my DEI part. No, we have to continually look at what's going on in our organizations, within ourselves, within our teams, and always be looking at these things. Marcia, any thoughts on this?
Just a big +1. I agree. One of the things I want to say about the CGs, and I know you appreciate a CG. You're obviously here because you're part of a CG, and that is awesome. But I'm going to go back to my Venn diagram. I have many layers, right, or many hats, depending upon how you look at it. And one of the things I've really appreciated about being part of the CG is I could be part of the CGs that were where I was or who I am professionally, but then I could also be part of CGs that were part of who I am as a person. So I had such a wonderful time leading the WIT CG. I volunteered in that right away. I came into IT from libraries, from academic law library, which was a very female-centric world. And I came into IT where I was typically the only female in the room. And that was a shock to me 6 years ago. And I was like, whoa, what is this? There has to be other women out there in IT. I just don't know them. So I quickly joined the WIT group so that I could build out that network. And so I highly encourage you to join some of the other CGs. One I really appreciate is the communications CG, and I put a link in there to the inclusive language guide. But take a look at that list of the CGs. Some are more active than others. If you're looking for an opportunity to get involved, as I said, professionally or to other areas of who you are as a person, that's a really good place to get started, to have those conversations, to grow your network, and to find like-minded people who want to make a change in whatever area of the world that you are in. I like this very last little thing here, which is don't stop. And I appreciate that it's not a stop sign. It's a piece of luggage, which means you're still traveling on this journey. All of us are. And we're not going to complete anything until we get to the end. And so we have a lot of opportunity to work together, to ask questions, to learn and to grow. And a lot of it's investing in yourself. You can't give away what you don't have. So the more time and effort you put into learning and to growing and to being who you are, then that's what you can turn around and give to your community or your organization.
There's an awesome quote there from Samia talking about your leadership in the WIT group, Marcia. So thank you for the work there. And it is inspiring and it helps others see work that they can do. And that's what we're asking here, right? Like we talked about in the beginning, we're not experts in this in any form, right? It's about caring and passion and doing the work to make changes. And this is probably the most important slide, and it's very small. This is just some of the stuff, right, where we can kind of begin. All of these have links, and this presentation will be shared with you all. But the DEI community group, Samia had led that, and she's transitioning to the DEI task force, and someone else is going to be leading that community group. We have the advisory committee, which Marcia and I sit on. There's a whole list of DEI resources from Educause that are out there on that website. That inclusivity guide, a lot of words that we could be changing within our normal work. Just this morning, we were having that conversation about, when we go into a room and hi guys, or who's going to man the table, and how do we change these words up and things and common phrases that we use all the time, even though we don't mean any harm by them, maybe, that we want to just kind of change how we work and what we say. ARIA's on there. There's so much work that's been done by the group that started the anti-racism in academia. And Samia, would you know when the next round is going to be starting on that?
So this year we were, just because of resource constraints just within our leadership team, we were planning on just focusing with organizational partnerships this year for ARIA. And so I think we probably won't be doing the national sprint for this year.
Okay.
But we have a lot of really good feedback on how we can grow and improve that program that we did for the last 2 years. So yeah. We just want to be a little bit more strategic on how we roll out the next national sprint.
Right. No, and it was such a great program. And I see my friend Brenda on here. We went through our ARIA journey together, and it's really great to just have these conversations. And I think that was a perfect place for a lot of people to start having these kind of conversations, and then hearing different viewpoints, right, from not just geographic, but cultural and background. People come from different countries and have different perceptions, and so it was a great journey to have and grow within DEI. So keep an eye out for ARIA when it's going to be done again as far as the journeys go, but great resources there. And thank you, Samia, and the rest of the team for that work. I listed Coupa HR. I forget what it stands for. Is it colleges and universities, something, but a lot of DEI work, right, in HR, and there's a lot of good. They have a 21-day racial equity challenge, right? Like you can sign up and do your own learning journey, right? And speaking of micro learning, our DEI advisory committee is working on a micro learning, starting with some of these topics that we were looking at on the hiring, the hiring toolkit and all those different aspects. So we're going to be looking at that and putting a call out for feedback on resources, challenges that people have. How can we gather that and put that together for our group? So look for that on the horizon as well. You'll also see the Educause CI commitment that Marcia talked about. I'll add the link to the roadmap here. I didn't know which version to link to, Marcia, so I hadn't put that in there yet. The hiring toolkit would be there. Mentoring circles has been great. I see, like I said, my friends Danielle and Fred on here. We had some great conversations over the holiday break, just getting into different topics in the mentoring circle. And I love the platform and the fact that we can get in there and create a topic on whatever it is and kind of start your own little mini group that ends, so that was very fun to do. The statistics, I pulled some earlier. There's been 2 polls within the last, year on DEI. One was a quick poll on kind of where we're at, and the other one was using analytics to advance equity goals. So small page of resources on places to get started, but join the groups, talk to the committee, but most importantly, do the work and just start with yourself. I think that's the thing I want to add here. Marcia, is there anything else you want to add about resources?
There's a lot that I'm dropping in the chat, and I know we'll make sure that you all have the slides and have these as well. As you're finding things, please feel free to share it out to the community. One that I have really grown to appreciate is the Inclusive IT Language Guide from UCI, and there's a link if you look at the 36 mark in the chat, you'll find it there. This is a PDF, and I know there's also a website out there, but this is really helpful. And I think this would speak to project managers as well. I know some of the projects I've been on is making sure that a lot of the documentation is inclusive. And so this is helpful just to know what to use for language, how to be most inclusive, especially when you're bringing people onto a project or you're wanting to complete it. I believe that was done more for the communication side, the public facing side with like websites and that kind of thing, but it's really helpful. I asked Sonia to add the ARIA website. I'm on a new Mac and I lost all my bookmarks. So thank you. That's also for me. Take a look at that. Even if you don't have the opportunity this year to go through the ARIA journey, it is a wonderful resource on the website because it has resources. So say you're a parent. One of the conversations that came up when Danielle and I were co-partnering on our ARIA group was, how do you raise the next generation? I think we all have the experience of having a racist uncle or maybe a family member who is really old school and doesn't seem to have a filter on their mouth. And so if you're a parent or perhaps you have little people in your life that you help with, how do you do the best you can to make sure that the next generation doesn't have that and it doesn't grow up in such a way that we need to continue to have this conversation? The ARIA website has some really good resources for parent. It also really helped me diversify who I follow on social media, Twitter, if you're on Facebook and Instagram and some of the others, and that it has a really good resource of people to follow. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in an echo chamber. And that's one of the things that I've learned is within the DI world is I only know what I know, but a lot of people out there know so much more, and I'm only going to learn from them if I follow up or if I partner with them in some way. So highly recommend that resource just as a place to get started. If you're in like that engage, the first few slides, we showed 3 different steps to be on that journey. If you're on that engage or that explore area, that's a good way to get started.
Great.
I had a quick question for you. When I'm thinking in terms of project managers, we are very fortunate if we have a team that is already fairly educated and have a respect for those things, right? And so you don't necessarily have to do much coaching. You're just there to kind of facilitate. But when you have those teams that aren't there yet, like maybe you're across multiple institutions, what are some quick shortcuts or steps or tips to just kind of keeping a pulse on those things and helping to ensure that if there are moments of discomfort, that maybe you can talk to that person offline and point them to some materials to just kind of help get that conversation going. It is our responsibility as project managers to be aware of those things because we're in that leadership role. And we kind of have to keep an eye on what's going on and how things are happening and the dynamics of what's going on with our groups. But how do you broach that? And how do you maybe share some quick information with those team members that might need a little bit of help?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I have one, I think, relevant opportunity. I was on a project where the project manager was really clear about what the scope was, what we were working on, that kind of thing. But they did something that I haven't ever seen on a project before, but I've been part of for hiring committees, is they started the project with what you would see is if you have to do the inclusive hiring or an unconscious bias training before you join a hiring committee, you know how that's so important to us there. They did the same thing for the project. And I was like, whoa, this is awesome, right? And so that might be something to try, or a periodic check-in, depending upon how long that project is, especially as new people may or may not join. It, you know, obviously it depends if it's an RFP that has a really quick turnaround, or if it's a large project that's going to take a couple of years. But that was one thing that to me was an aha moment. And I've tried to use that other places when I've been part of a new project and bringing a group in, especially if it's stakeholders from outside my teams that I would be leading and others, was to treat it like the first meeting for a hiring committee and talk about unconscious bias and how the team was expected those responsibilities and how to treat each other and that kind of thing. And then check in, like I said, every quarter or something. It did work. It was also a project manager who was really willing to try something new because they had been burned before. So that could be an opportunity.
I would add that a lot of those challenges, in my experience, come from unclear direction or unclear assignments on who has to do what, and then establishing those kind of rules of communication, like what are we going to do regarding this project. Sometimes it's because there's a lack of a clear lead, you know, so just putting those things out there and making it known to everybody that you know, who's responsible for what, and then like Marcia talked about, those regular check-ins I think is invaluable, right? And then even since we're not always, you know, sometimes we're together in person, sometimes we're still in Zoom, allowing for that just engagement time before or after meetings for people to talk and chat can go a long way, because, you know, we sometimes miss that in-person connection, and it turns into, well, kind of just business as usual, right? So, you know, working on ways to facilitate that communication would help, in my opinion. But you have a whole room full of experienced project managers here as well. So, you know, I'd love to hear from the community if there's any you know, tools that they've used to deal with this challenge.
So Felix, I can add to that. I have a story that you know about, we talked about this morning. And I was leading a project and I used the term whitelist because it was an endpoint management. It's a very common term. We whitelist and we blacklist. And I'm leading this discussion, organizing tasks, and I'm moving along, and someone in the group said, no, we don't whitelist. And I'm like, yes, we need to get this done. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went on. And I was like, you're absolutely right. I apologize. And I understand, you know, we ended up calling it a allow list, but she kind of like called me out. I know these people very well, but I think if she had not done that and waited to tell me, it wouldn't have had the same effect. But, you know, I fell on my sword. I apologized. And, you know, we just moved on. But again, it was an education process for me and the whole group. Now, you can't do that with everyone, but, you know, it's part of the learning. And it was a good example. And now I can do the same for others.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I appreciate that. I share that for me, walking into a room and saying, hi guys, is something that I've always done. And it's hard. Or talking about, manning a table versus staffing a table, and it's these things that we do unconsciously really without thinking about it. But the biggest thing we could do is model the change that we want to see, right? And when I was in a room where people were always saying manning the table, when it was my turn to say it, I would always say staffing a table. It didn't always have to be me calling someone out, but demonstrating, the behavior that we like to see, goes a long way, and people kind of catch on to that sometimes.
I like what you had to say, Carol, because one, that's very vulnerable to say, hey, I was wrong. And so I think that's a huge win for you as project manager, and your people see like, oh, wow, we can speak up, and that's great. I was trying to get away from saying guys, because I'm in the Midwest and that seems to be a very normal thing, but I know it's not inclusive. And so I actually told a couple of my teams like, okay, I'm looking for a new way to greet. And I don't know what it's going to be. If we were in Texas, I'd say y'all, but that just doesn't roll off the tongue in Nebraska. So I'm going to find other ways to greet. You can laugh all you want, but I'm going to try them and you can help me. And they were all engaged in the process, and it helped all of us step away from using guys as the way we would greet each other to other things. And then we also solicited ideas like folks and friends and people and fellow human beings. I mean, it got really creative on that. And so I think sometimes a really good approach is to be honest and say, hey, I'm trying to improve this. Can you all help me? Accountability.
I think we settled on hey cats. Wasn't that, Marcia, what we said?
I appreciated how you said herding cats. I love that analogy for what we do, because so often we've all had pets, right? Like it can be hard. Other questions or comments for the group? Because this, you're the experts. You know the answer. Kara.
Hi, I pronounce my name Kara. I'm at the University of Washington. And something that I do want to share, because I am one of the founding members of the Community of Practice for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at our campus. And what has become clear in the way that I help others start to bridge their way into this work, because you can see I'm very white. I come from a very different background than most people. I could say that I contain a high level of privilege. And where I started to get involved in equity work and social justice was from my own place of Black and my own place of loss. And so I came to the group saying that women in tech issues are very important to me. And when I was able to come from that place of my hurt that I've experienced in the technology world comes from being a woman, there was room for other people to say, and my hurt comes from being disabled, my hurt comes from being BIPOC. And we could start to see that in our space, there was a range of experience and a range of privilege and a space that we could all work together from, because we all shared that language of loss. And so when it comes to equity work for me, it can be small things such as adjusting my language so that the culture is more welcoming for other people. But if you are starting to get to that place of I want to do more, I suggest or recommend that you start to look at where in your life you may have been experiencing less privilege than another. I also come from a less wealthy background, so there's a class issue for me as well as a gender issue. I'm also the first in my family to have a 4-year degree. Working in higher ed, that's a tough one to swallow too. And so by being able to empathize from this place of I know what it feels like to be discriminated against, you can help other people on your journey, whether you want to focus on race issues, disability issues, or whatever else you want to go from.
Thank you for sharing. I know Marcia shared earlier the Better Allies website. That's a great place to find a book and resources and newsletters that talk about these topics all the time. And one thing I wanted to add, was sometimes we expect the work to be done by those people who have been discriminated against or, historically underrepresented. And that's like this tax that gets put on to the group to make change. And sometimes if it's not, sponsored or led by leadership, it's work that just kind of gets done and it doesn't really change things. So, when you don't hear things being said, it's because there's also sometimes a tax that's put on that person to do so, right? So me speaking up and saying something might hurt something in my future. So I may tend to be quiet until it gets to a point where I feel like, okay, I can't do that, and that might be me speaking for myself. But when we see it with others, it's important sometimes to be an ally and do that work and say, hey, you know what, that's not right, even though they may not be speaking up, to say something, right?
I appreciate that. In my job, I was on a leadership team, and as noted, I was typically the only female in the room, and I was really unsure how I was supposed to do it, right? Like how do I sit on a leadership team? And so it took me a while to figure out how to have a voice on there. And a couple months into my role, my team came to me and they asked, well, what do you talk about at the leadership team? And here's what we'd like you to bring up at that team since you have a seat at that table. And that was an aha moment for me, much like Felix said, sometimes you don't feel like you can speak up. When I took myself out of the equation and I realized that my team was expecting me to be their voice at that table. And it really empowered me to reframe how I viewed myself at that table and what I talked about. And it wasn't about what I was doing, it was about what this team was doing. And if we needed resources to make that request, or if they had some wins that I wanted the rest of the group to know, that I could share it out that way and really amplify the good work that they were doing. And so I do think sometimes it's really scary to think about speaking up. So if you step back and approach it as, well, how can I be a voice? How can I use my influence to make a difference? That can be helpful. You're still going to have those deodorant days where you're nervous and your knees are shaking. But I do feel like taking oneself out of the equation and looking at how you represent a team or how you can amplify somebody else's voice is a good way to get started. It's not always the best way, but it'll help you. At least it helped me in that instance. Yeah, Sonia.
Thank you, Marcia. So piggybacking on what Carol said, I was in a similar situation. So I'm very new to my institution in this project management type of role. And one of the privileges or advantages that I think project managers have is that they interact with vendors a lot more sometimes than the IT folks who might be actually doing the work, like the developers or something, right? So so in the situation that I was in, was actually on a call with the vendors and my immediate team and my manager. And it was actually the manager who was using the discriminatory term, instead of allow list, she was using whitelist. And so I was in this very uncomfortable situation. It was a meeting with the vendor and I felt compelled to speak up, but I literally had to hold myself back. And then at the end of the day, I reached out to my manager and I gave her all of the resources that we put in the chat today, which is the inclusive language guide, which is all of the materials that I could collect and give her. And she was very, very responsive. So she said, I am really sorry that I used that term. And she, in fact, she anonymized it, but she said that this is something that has come up in our internal team meeting, and she brought that up with the vendors as well as the upper leadership team that was in the meeting. So I think that, it's like what Kara was saying. I don't identify as a Black person, but then because I know the context or the harm that those terms can cause, and it kind of feels like you're speaking up for someone else that might be you, that might be identifying as someone else, right? But using your privilege in ways that you can to advocate or amplify others' voices it's really, I think project managers, like they have some advantages there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
All right, well, we've
I
got
will second
about,
about project managers.
I was-
You all have like magical powers to get stuff done on campus. So whenever I've worked with a project manager, you all get stuff done. So if you're willing to and able to take on that role of using particular language or inclusive language and setting expectations, I've seen you people make those in leadership get stuff done. So thank you. And
that's
I interrupted
perfect. We
somebody.
lead
Sorry.
without authority. It's part of the role. Anything we can do to be the voice for someone else is fantastic.
Well, thank you all. We appreciate being here.
Thank you so much, you two. I don't want to cut this because I could sit here and talk with everyone forever about this particular topic, but let's go ahead and just wrap things up and let everybody get moving along. Gonna put a plug in out there again. We do have an opening for someone to join our steering committee. There's no criteria that you have to have or anything, just a passion for project management and an interest in trying to share your ideas and help us drive some of the content and the webinars that we offer each month. We do ad hoc meetings as well too. So, you know, there's always an opportunity for more ideas and more things for us to make this as valuable as possible. So if you're interested, or maybe you just want to have a conversation to learn a little bit more about it, you can reach out to one of our steering committee members directly, or you can just contact myself or Lisa, and we'd be more than happy to set some time aside and just kind of chit chat with you and let you know sort of what to expect and get to know the crazy group that is our steering committee. We're a lot of fun. All right. I think when we are going through the meetings for the rest of 2022, next month's March 15th one was listed as pending, but it actually has been confirmed. Next month, some of my colleagues at the University of Michigan in our accessibility department are going to be presenting on some of the accessibility considerations in project management. Now, there's some of the obvious things like the legalese that goes into evaluating contracts and reviewing these products with vendors, but there's other takes that we can look at in terms of development when you're developing homegrown solutions and just some things that you want to keep at the front of your minds early on rather than thinking of it as an afterthought. And they're going to be sharing some information and some materials that they use as sort of a guiding checklist and things to consider and tools that could be used. So really excited to have them come join us. But if you have a chance, please do mark that on your calendar for next month and come prepared. It's a lot of information, and I'm sure that they'll probably have more resources for you to review after the fact, because it's a big topic to try and consider too. That's all we got, folks. I can't say y'all either, Marcia. It's just not my, I'm a Midwesterner, but I am trying to break the you guys.